My name's Jeff O'Keefe. I'm the executive director of Zen Peacemakers, and this is another one of our what we call peacemaker circles. We try to do this about once a week and offer something interesting to the community. So I'm glad you're able to be here to take advantage of this today. I'm so glad our new friend John Brehm is joining us today. Talk about the art of appreciative attention. And John brings together, we were just chatting earlier, John brings together two of my favorite things, mindfulness practice and poetry. And he'll be talking about that today and talking about a way of appreciating poetry that we probably weren't taught in school. I think it might be safe to say, but that is really rich and rewarding and brings poetry alive. So I'm not going to take away any of John's presentation. I'll let him do that, and I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and pass the talking stick to John Brehm. John, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, so much, and yeah, thank you all for coming. And I'm just so grateful to be invited. I want to thank Chloe Wright actually for extending the invitation to me. Yeah, I just finished reading Bernie Glassman's Bearing Witness, and such an incredibly powerful book, inspiring book. And so I'm really honored to be invited into your space and to share some poems with you and a new way of kind of experiencing poems. And yeah, I just want to say how much I admire the work that you're doing. It's such important and beautiful work, and that book is just extraordinary, as I'm sure you all feel. So yeah, I'm going to talk about this new way of reading poetry, this appreciative way, and then look at some poems together and have a discussion. So it won't just be me talking the whole time. I'd like for us to engage with some poems as a group that I had Chloe send to you. We may even do a little sitting practice if there's time. And then I'll share a few of my own poems before we get to the Q&A. So, another thing I wanted to say, I love that not knowing is one of your foundational principles. And I love the way Bernie Glassman talked about that in his book. And that's something that resonates deeply with me and with my own way of thinking about how we engage with poetry. So it was wonderful to feel that kind of synergy, the dovetailing of that foundational principle of your practice and its manifestation in my own practice, my own way of working with poems. So I'm really delighted to discover that. So I've promised to offer a new way of reading poems, and that implies the rejection of an old way of reading poems. And as Jeff was saying, I think it's probably fair to say that the way we were taught poetry in school was largely to decipher the poem rather than to enjoy or appreciate it. And that way of reading, even though it's something we may have learned in middle school or high school, it kind of persists for us. And one way of thinking about that approach to poetry is that it's kind of puritanical. That is, it invites us to, or insists that we skip over the experience and enjoyment of the poem and get right to work on interpreting it and analyzing it. And interpreting it and analyzing it in a rather aggressive way, where we are trying to ferret out the meaning of the poem, what it means, and demanding that the poem reveal its secrets to us. And Billy Collins has a wonderful poem about this that I want to read for you now. I didn't include it in the packet, but it's a pretty easy poem to get on just hearing it. It's called Introduction to Poetry, and some of you may know this. It's a pretty famous poem. Introduction to Poetry. I ask them to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say, drop a mouse into the poem and watch him probe his way out. Or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with a rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. So that's a very playful way of making an important point about this very impatient, aggressive way of reading, this demand to know what the poem is really saying, and it arises from a fundamental mistrust of the poem and a suspicion that the poem is concealing something, it's withholding something from us. There's a suspicion that of the surface of the poem, that's something we need to look past, that's a kind of screen or scrim that's hiding the real meaning of the poem, and we have to kind of become aggressive in our relationship with the poem in order to find out what it really means, like tying it to a chair and beating it with a hose. And I want to give an example of this way of dealing with a poem, engaging with a poem that occurred on retreat a number of years ago. And this was before I had kind of fleshed out my thoughts on appreciative attention. So it was the first day of the retreat. My wife and I teach these mindfulness retreats that incorporate Feldenkrais's awareness through movement lessons and sitting meditation and mindful poetry discussions. And this was the first discussion. And the poem that we were reading had some kind of ambiguous lines in it. And there was a lot of confusion and sort of frustration about some of these lines. And we went back and forth, and it was not a very satisfying conversation. And then one student who had been kind of frowning intently at the poem while everyone was talking about it said, I think I've got it figured out. And he proceeded to take us through a very tedious line by line explication of what he thought the poet was saying. And it just, you could feel the air go out of the room when he did this. And it also reminded me of what Bernie Glassman says, whenever you know you've reached a dead end. And this felt very much like that kind of dead end. And yeah, it had this deadening effect. The poem had become this kind of lifeless object that had no other purpose than to deliver some kind of meaning, which this participant felt that he had discovered and was proud to share with us. And I think it was maybe that experience even that put me on this path of really wanting to develop an alternative way of engaging with poetry, to move as far away from that way of reading as possible, and to find something that was more lively, more intimate, more heart-centered, less analytical, less interpretive, and more focused on just the sheer enjoyment and the intense experience that we can have when we enter a poem, when we cease to hold it at arm's length and look at it, study it, but actually enter the poem. In a way, you might think of it as a non-dual practice. So the boundary between us as readers and the poem as a separate object begins to dissolve, and there's this kind of aliveness and this flow that moves back and forth between our own consciousness and the consciousness that is still alive in the poem. But this rather joyless way of reading, which is unfortunately quite prominent, regards the poem as a kind of puzzle or a problem to be solved. And of course, our mind loves problems. We love to have things to ruminate on endlessly. And our problems never really get solved, or if they do, they don't stay solved for very long, or new set of problems comes up, and the mind, goes into this sort of automatic mode of problem solving. And a Zen teacher that I work with sometimes, Russell Delman, and I think Russell Delman was one of the teachers who accompanied Bernie Glassman to the first Auschwitz bearing witness retreat. I'm not certain of that, but I'm pretty sure he was on that retreat. Anyway, a wonderful teacher. And he sometimes will pose the question, who would you be without your problems? Who would you be without your problems? It's quite a stunning, it's like a koan, when you think about it, it's like, who would I be if I were able to disengage from this way of being in the world that is so oriented around these intractable problems. And we treat poems in the same way, that they're just another problem to be figured out, to be solved, to be untangled. So, but even if we're not reading poems in this kind of aggressive, impatient way, if we're focused primarily on knowing what the poem means, on deciphering what the poet is saying, we'll miss or skip over or disregard or kind of downplay the pleasures that the poem is offering to us. Those things that we can deeply resonate with and enjoy and deeply experience if we approach the poem in this more appreciative mode. And I was thinking back to all the literature courses I took in college and in graduate school, and I don't think I ever heard a professor say something like, "Oh my God, that's a beautiful line," or "What a stunning metaphor," or just like, "I love this poem." I honestly don't think I ever heard anybody say that. And instead, it was always this very heady, hyper sophisticated analysis and interpretation. And that seems to me the wrong way to engage with poems, this kind of aggressive, impatient, very sort of left brain way of reading. And again, we miss so much when we read that way. When we make that primary, we miss so much of what else is happening in the poem and our experience of it. And there's a place for analysis and interpretation, but I would say it has to be secondary in importance and secondary in sequence, so that after the poem is appreciated, enjoyed, we see where that takes us, and that may lead to some ideas, some discursive statements about the poem, some more analytical kind of thinking, but that has to be more in the background. And the more intuitive, kind of open-hearted, empathic way of reading needs to be what we bring to the poem first. At least that's my view. And this is true even when poems are about painful subjects. There can still be so much that we enjoy about a poem. Just because a poem is painful doesn't preclude us from appreciating its beauty, let's say, or its power. And I wanted to share the Joy Harjo poem with you now, and I did. I hope you all got copies of these poems. It's fine if you didn't, but it's nice to be able to read along.
John, if it helps, and if people did not get this, I'm not sure that it was sent or not. If somebody could thumbs up or thumbs down, if you, okay, it looks like you got it. I was going to say I could share a screen if that helps too.
Yeah, well, maybe show of hands of how many people who didn't get it. So there are some people who didn't get it. I couldn't actually see how many hands went up. Yeah, if that I have, it's a little distracting for me to do that, but if you'd like to do that, Jeff, that'd be great.
Okay. You see that, John?
Yeah, great. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, that works well. Okay, great. Yeah, so this is a painful poem, but nevertheless one that we can deeply appreciate. Speaking Tree. It's by Joy Harjo. I had a beautiful dream. I was dancing with a tree. Sandra Cisneros. Some things on this earth are unspeakable. Genealogy of the broken, a shy wind threading leaves after a massacre, or the smell of coffee and no one there. Some humans say trees are not sentient beings, but they do not understand poetry. Nor can they hear the singing of trees when they are fed by wind or water music, or hear their cries of anguish when they are broken and bereft. Now I am a woman longing to be a tree planted in a moist, dark earth between sunrise and sunset. I cannot walk through all realms. I carry a yearning I cannot bear alone in the dark. What shall I do with all this heartache? The deepest rooted dream of a tree is to walk even just a little ways from the place next to the doorway to the edge of the river of life and drink. I have heard trees talking long after the sun has gone down. Imagine what it would be like to dance close together in this land of water and knowledge, to drink deep what is undrinkable. So yeah, obviously, a poem about some pretty painful experiences, a poem in which the poet expresses her own pain and loneliness and longing, and yet a poem that we can enter deeply through the doorway of noticing and appreciating. And I'll just say a few things that I love about this poem, and then I'll I'll say some more things. Then we'll look at some poems together, and you can begin to interact with them as well. But yeah, I love the way it starts with this really powerful statement. Some things on this earth are unspeakable. Some things on this earth are unspeakable, are just too painful to speak of. And yet, then she goes on to speak of them, or at least to list them. Genealogy of the broken, a shy wind threading leaves after a massacre, or the smell of coffee and no one there. And I love the kind of strangeness of that list. Genealogy of the broken, a shy wind threading leaves after a massacre. I mean, that's such an incredible line, right? A shy wind threading leaves, this gentle wind, threading leaves, not ruffling the leaves, but threading them after a massacre. It just seems extraordinary to me to be able to say that, to bring those things together. And the word threading was resonating for me this morning. Like threading, like sewing back together or stitching or somehow trying to bring return to wholeness, this scene of terror and death. And then right after that, this just ordinary or the smell of coffee and no one there. Um, I just admire the kind of oddness of those things being brought together, those three lines. And then the kind of leaps between the stanzas, to go from that to some humans say trees are not sentient beings, but they do not understand poetry. Again, just a kind of stunning statement. And there's a bit of a leap between the first and the second stanza. She doesn't really show us how those things are connected. And I love this idea that an understanding of poetry is a whole way of seeing the world as sentient, alive, awake, and aware. And if you don't understand poetry, you might be tempted to think otherwise, that trees are not sentient beings. Nor can they hear the singing of trees when they are fed by wind or water music, or hear their cries of anguish when they are broken and bereft. And I love what she's saying in those lines, but I love the music of the lines. Or hear their cries of anguish when they are broken and bereft. That we have cut ourselves off from being sensitive to the cries of the earth. Thich Nhat Hanh, when he was asked what's the most important thing we can do for the earth, and he said or for our time, and he said, to hear within ourselves the cries of the earth. To hear within ourselves the earth crying. To somehow regain that capacity to hear, to empathize with, to deeply know our oneness with the earth. And then the poem, the vulnerability that Harjo brings. Now I am a woman longing to be a tree planted in a moist dark earth between sunrise and sunset. I cannot walk through all realms. I carry a yearning I cannot bear alone in the dark. What shall I do with all this heartache? I mean, this just sense of being pushed to the limit of her pain and loneliness and longing and heartbreak, and then just saying that so straightforwardly in the poem. I just admire that greatly. What shall I do with all this heartache? And it's not so much the longing that she can't bear; it's the loneliness, like having no one to hold the pain with her, no one to carry it with her. But in writing the poem, she invites us to carry that pain with her. And if we read it with an open heart, we do carry that pain, and the poem helps us carry our own. So I don't want to go on and on about the poem. I just wanted to kind of demonstrate that even poems that are about difficult experiences and painful, we can still become more intimate with them when we appreciate them. When we don't get stuck in like, I don't know what is she saying here? Or I don't quite get this line. That takes us out of an intimate relationship with the poem. So the subject matter doesn't really matter. What matters is how we see the poem, how we choose to engage with it. And as Hari Das Baba said, when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. We might also say that when a saint meets a pickpocket, all he sees is his divine essence, his Buddha nature. And the same is true with poetry. Is if all we're looking for is what the poem means, then we'll only see those things through some kind of interpretive strategy. We'll only see the things that contribute to the meaning, our effort to figure the poem out, and we'll pass over everything else. We'll pass over or downplay or simply ignore those things that don't contribute to this sense of meaning. So circling back to my opening statements about a new way of reading poetry and a kind of letting go, clearing the space for this new way, letting go of this old way, I want to share with you now the first few paragraphs of an essay that's going to be in a new anthology that I've just finished editing. It's going to come out in September, called The Poetry of Grief, Gratitude, and Reverence. And this essay, The Art of Appreciative Attention, will appear in that book. And I just thought I would share a few paragraphs with you from this. So much of our growth on the spiritual path comes not from gaining new knowledge, but from remembering what we've always known but have forgotten. Not from learning, but unlearning, clearing away the obscurations, the false beliefs, and unexamined assumptions that keep us from accessing our innate wisdom and living from our true nature. The poet Charles Wright puts it succinctly, for knowledge add, for wisdom take away. I love that kind of pith teaching, for knowledge add, for wisdom take away. The same is true for poetry. Our first step is to let go of our preconceptions about what a poem is and how we should approach it. The idea, for example, that poems are little more than verbal mechanisms, sometimes frustratingly elusive ones, for delivering meaning. Once we let go of that conception of the poem, we can also relinquish what Elizabeth Bishop called the immodest demand for complete comprehension. And there's that need to know, that demand to know for certainty. But I love the way she says it, the immodest demand for complete comprehension. The best poems retain a mystery at their core that we will never fully understand, an experience ultimately beyond the grasp of the grasping mind. The poem that can be explained is not the true poem. When I was in graduate school, deconstruction was in vogue, and literature professors and PhD students would often speak of interrogating a poem, seemingly unaware of or unbothered by the association of interrogation with torture. It was not enough to study or appreciate a poem. You had to interrogate it to prove that you were a tough-minded literary critic, and more importantly, to show that you held the poem in your power, regarded it with suspicion, and could make it say what you wanted it to say by violence if necessary. This way of reading, which still persists in academic settings, is antithetical to the appreciative mode. It is fundamentally aggressive and arises from our desire to control the messy, unpredictable flow of life, to impose fixity on flux. The practice of appreciative attention can relax the grasping mind and our anxious need to know. And this practice is refreshingly uncomplicated. I mean, there really couldn't be anything simpler than what I'm proposing. We simply attend to and savor what we find most pleasing or compelling or resonant in the poem. What feels most alive? What feels most lit up? It might be a line or a stanza, an image, a metaphor, a gesture, a surprising turn, or stunning connection, a lucid, inescapable rhythm, to use Wallace Stevens' arresting phrase, an upsurge of emotion, a profound insight, a compelling tone of voice, perhaps a single perfectly chosen, unexpectedly splendid word, or perhaps the whole arc of the poem, the journey it takes us on. Whatever it is that calls to us, the practice is to savor it, to linger, to let your appreciation deepen and expand and take you where it will. Reading poems in this way can help us slow down and stay present with what's right in front of us on the page and in our lives. When our orientation to the poem is appreciative rather than interpretive, when we make primary what we love rather than what we understand or don't understand, the poem opens itself more fully to our gaze. And the more we see, the more the poem shows us. Just as a person will relax and come alive when they feel truly seen, poems begin to glow in the light of our appreciative attention. Ian McGilchrist in The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World, suggests that we experience works of art as being more like people than things. Works of art, especially those that unfold in time, like poetry and music, possess a quality of aliveness, an organic self-coherence that is subtle, fluid, complex, and responsive to our awareness. So that's all I'll read from the essay. Those are just the first few paragraphs. But I love McGilchrist's idea that we experience works of art as being more like people than like things. That is, we kind of experience them as being alive, unless we've been taught to not do that, which unfortunately is often the case. But I think it's quite a striking thing to say, that it's not an object, it's not an inert object, but an aliveness that we can engage with our own aliveness. So this way of reading, I think, helps us stay connected to and at ease with not knowing. It also helps us to stay in a mode of kind of loving awareness. And that has profound impacts on the way we not only read poetry, but the way we move through the world. Nisargadatta said, affectionate awareness is the crucial factor that brings reality into focus. Affectionate awareness is the crucial factor that brings reality into focus. Affectionate awareness or appreciative attention, it allows us to see things as they are, untainted by grasping and aversion, and free from the self-centered proliferation of thought, the distortions of the egoic mind, to see things as they are and to be with them as they are. And so we can practice with this appreciative attention in poetry and then, take it off the cushion, you might say, into how we engage with the world. And then you might ask, well, why is that so important? And I want to share a passage from the Jewish theologian Abraham Heschel, who said, as civilization advances, the sense of wonder declines. Such decline is an alarming symptom of our state of mind. Mankind will not perish for want of information, but only for want of appreciation. The beginning of our happiness lies in the understanding that life without wonder is not worth living. Wonder or radical amazement is therefore a prerequisite for an authentic awareness of that which is. So Nisargadatta and Heschel, although they're coming from very different spiritual traditions, are saying essentially the same thing, is this way of looking at the world, this more loving way, this way of appreciative attention, affectionate awareness, however you want to describe it, is the key to seeing things as they truly are. And when we see things as they truly are, that's another way of saying waking up. That's awakening, to see things as they truly are. And so reading poems, seeing them in this way can help us retrain our minds from this obsessive, self-centered commentary about everything to a more relaxed, appreciative way of engaging with present moment experience. So this is all pretty abstract, and I don't want to kind of front load looking at these poems together with too many concepts and words. But that kind of gives us an orientation. And now I'd like to share with you the Elizabeth Bishop poem, A Cold Spring. And so, yeah, Jeff, if you could screen share this again, that would be great. Wonderful. Thank you. So we'll have some discussion around this poem. I mean, if you feel called to respond. But, as you're hearing it, I mean, there's a lot going on in this poem, but I would just invite you to relax and not worry about any kind of coming up with a global sense of like what the poem is or is about, or, what it means. And just pay attention to those local moments, those words or lines or images or rhythms or sounds that feel especially alive, that resonate with you, that you like. Just like go towards what you like in the poem without thinking too much about it. A Cold Spring, for Jane Dewey, Maryland. And Jane Dewey was a friend of Bishop's, and would invite Bishop to stay at her farm when she was traveling, and something Bishop obviously greatly enjoyed. And so this poem is almost like a thank you poem. And it begins with an epigraph from Hopkins. Nothing is so beautiful as spring. A cold spring, the violet was flawed on the lawn. For 2 weeks or more, the trees hesitated. The little leaves waited, carefully indicating their characteristics. Finally, a grave green dust settled over your big and aimless hills. One day, in a chill white blast of sunshine, on the side of one, a calf was born. The mother stopped lowing and took a long time eating the afterbirth, a wretched flag. But the calf got up promptly and seemed inclined to feel gay. The next day was much warmer. Greenish white dogwood infiltrated the wood, each petal burned apparently by a cigarette butt. And the blurred red bud stood beside it, motionless, but almost more like movement than any placeable color. 4 deer practiced leaping over your fences. The infant oak leaves swung through the sober oak. Song sparrows were wound up for the summer, and in the maple the complimentary cardinal cracked a whip, and the sleeper awoke, stretching miles of green limbs from the south. In his cap the lilacs whitened, then one day they fell like snow. Now in the evening a new moon comes. The hills grow softer. Tufts of long grass show where each cowflop lies. The bullfrogs are sounding, slack strings plucked by heavy thumbs. Beneath the light, against your white front door, the smallest moths, like Chinese fans, flatten themselves, silver and silver gilt, over pale yellow, orange, or gray. Now from the thick grass, the fireflies begin to rise. Up, then down, then up again, lit on the ascending flight, drifting simultaneously to the same height, exactly like the bubbles in champagne. Later on, they rise much higher, and your shadowy pastures will be able to offer these particular glowing tributes every evening now throughout the summer. So yeah, I'd love to open it up now and just yeah, I'd love to hear, like what you like about the poem. What feels especially, kind of lit up or resonant, or just, yeah, what do you enjoy? Yeah, and maybe using the Zoom hand is a little bit easier if you can do that. But yeah, Chalem, am I saying that right? Probably not. Yeah,
Close. It's Hebrew. It's Chalem.
Halem, of course. Yeah,
Chalem.
beautiful. Halem.
I really appreciate being invited into the fragrance of this poem,
Yeah.
and sort of almost being invited to wander with the poet through all of this sensual sense feeding experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, you're entering the poem and it's not standing outside looking at it, but you're actually entering it, feeling it, sensing it, absorbing the scent, the textures, the fragrance. It's just it's an immersive experience, right? Yeah, it's lovely. That's a lovely way of reading it. Was there a particular line that struck out at you, or just the overall feeling of?
Well, a very overall feeling, but my favorite fragrance is cow shit. It just, and so when that appeared in the poem, it was just, I was home, because that fragrance is so life affirming, so grounded, so earthy, so rich, that was probably my happy.
That's great. I grew up in Nebraska, so I am well familiar with the smell of cow shit. It has a very distinctive fragrance, and it's not that bad, actually, in small quantities. But yeah, I love when Bishop says, tufts of long grass show where each cow flop lies. And it's true, that you can tell because the cow shit is fertilizing it's kind of supercharging the grass right around it. But yeah, she has such a keen eye and ear and nose for everything that's going on as spring is unfolding. Yeah, thank you for that. Jacqueline.
I just really loved this poem, and I love all 4 of the poems you sent. What a great curation of explosion of emotional
Oh, thank you.
wonderfulness. So I knew the other poets, but I didn't know I didn't know Elizabeth Bishop, and so I Googled her and I watched a little wonderful video on her life.
Mhm.
And it's so good. I recommend it to anybody.
Yeah.
It's so well done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, uh, she was also a visual artist. She
Yeah.
painted watercolors, and
Mm.
you can really perceive that
Yeah.
her being a visual artist in
Yeah.
her poetry.
Yeah.
It's so rich with visual imagery.
Yeah. 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 That's a great point. I mean, she was quite a wonderful watercolorist, and yeah, she brings a painter's eye to this slow unfolding of spring, and notices, just tremendous detail. Even just the opening, the violet was flawed on the lawn. And those early flowers tend to be not so perfect, but the violet was flawed on the lawn. The little leaves weighted, carefully indicating their characteristics. Very precise seeing, right? I mean, just the way leaves before they unfold, you can kind of see the shape they're going to take. But I love the way she says it. For 2 weeks or more, the trees hesitated. The little leaves waited, carefully unfolding, indicating their characteristics. But yeah, there are all kinds of lovely visual images. Greenish white dogwood infiltrated the wood, each petal burned apparently by a cigarette butt. And the blurred red bud stood beside it, motionless, but almost more like movement than any placeable color. And there's a lot of movement in the poem. 4 deer practice leaping over your fences. The sense of life, just everything's bounding back to life, but they're practicing leaping over the fences.
And I love how she puts in so it's not saccharine. What was it? Grave green.
Dust, yeah,
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 grave green dust. So it kind of grounds
yeah,
it in a sense of this is absolutely exquisitely beautiful, and
yeah.
it's part of a whole thing of life.
Yeah, there's the wretched afterbirth of the newborn calf. There's the cow shit, which maybe not everybody appreciates as much as Helen. But yeah, the whole thing is there. It's not just a pretty picture. Yep. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And there was another hand up. I hope I talked so long. Who, someone else was
Oh,
going.
you had I think that was me.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Yes. Dennis.
I lowered my hand because you had already mentioned the movement piece. I think
Oh,
that was apart from the imagery. I just think that the way that she described movement was just so beautiful. So
yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I kind of,
no worries.
robbed you of that response. I get so excited. I've read this poem a million times, but I never get tired of it. But yeah, there's a lot of movement. The infant oak leaves swung through the sober oak. And in the maple, the complementary cardinal cracked a whip, and the sleeper awoke, stretching miles of green limbs from the south. Yeah, it's so alive. Everything is alive. Um, and I wondered if you noticed the rhyme of the poem. It's not a strict rhyme scheme, but many of the lines are rhymed. And that's another pleasure of the poem. Just the sonic dimension of the poem is quite wonderful. So there you have oak and awoke, wood and stood, and more in color. And not every line is rhymed, but many of them are. And you'll make, if you go through the poem again, you'll notice like how much sound echoing there is in the poem. But yeah, lots of wonderful movement. Yeah, Barbara.
So I just so loved how the popping of each exquisite detail
Yeah.
was actually like the entire blossoming and crescendo of the whole.
Yeah, right.
Like the movement of the whole was captured in each presentness.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah, and there's a definite movement. I mean, she's sort of tracking the growth of spring. There's a lot of time markers in the poem. One day, the next day, now in the evening, now. so she's bringing us right up to the present as she's writing this poem. And yeah, a lot of just exquisite detail that brings the whole scene to life in every particular thing that she witnesses. Seems to almost be like a hologram of the whole thing. Yeah, it's beautiful. So yeah, Barbara now.
Yes, I really enjoyed the flow of the poem, and also the way she invited us to see the world through her eyes, what she perceived, the details of the world, and what she pays attention to, and what some things mean to her. Like she also managed to, in this line, in his cup the lilacs whitened, then one day they fell like snow. So she's indicating the passing of time and the changeability and impermanence, right? So it's a very deep message.
Yeah.
Now in the evening, a new moon comes. So again, change and time passing.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate the full, like she really invited me to walk that space and experience it in every detail. Also, I love the line about the bullfrogs. The bullfrogs are, the bullfrogs are sounding slack strings plucked by heavy thumbs. I just loved it. I love the sound of bullfrogs, and I love the way she found the words to express that sound. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's my favorite moment in the poem. And the many favorite moments, but that's so incredible. That metaphor. Bullfrogs are sounding slack strings plucked by heavy thumbs, like a bass, upright bass, you can imagine. But it's not just a bass, but it's bass with slack strings, and it's not just thumbs, but heavy thumbs, Just brilliant. I mean, the imaginative power that she brings to these scenes and these sounds that she's hearing is very much like the creative energies of the earth itself. And this is a more interpretive kind of statement, but I feel like there's some truth in that her ability to engage with this so imaginatively is the human quality of creativity, which is very like the creativity that's actually bringing these things to life. That's probably not the best way to say it, but yes, it is extraordinary. And I chose these poems in part because they are all appreciative poems. That is, Bishop is demonstrating appreciative attention here in the way that she's looking at everything. And so when we bring our own appreciative attention to the poem, it sort of amplifies that energy of appreciative attention. We witness the poet doing it, and then we appreciate what the poet is seeing and doing. And so it kind of gets magnified, or this sort of synergy. So that's really lovely. Yeah. Were there any other hands up? Anybody else want to jump in?
John, we have a chat from Joanna who said, please comment on how entering the poem and the imagery and feelings evoked versus analyzing.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's an important aspect of the way I like to read poems and teach poems. So when I think of entering a poem, I think largely of, well, you can think of it as actually stepping inside the space of the poem. So a couple of people have mentioned, like, I feel like I'm walking with the poet through this scene. So when we get inside a poem, we're seeing what the poet is seeing. We're inhabiting the space, the world that the poet has created. And that's different from standing back and looking at it and making statements about it. So it's different than like feeling like I'm walking with Bishop as she moves through this landscape. Is very different than asking, like, well, what is the purpose of this poem? Or what does she mean? Why does she include the calf being born? What's the significance of that? Or what does it suggest that she personifies spring? The sleeper awoke, stretching miles of green limbs from the south. What's up with that? That she's actually treating spring as if it were a body that can awaken and stretch its limbs. So that asking those kinds of questions, making kind of interpretive statements keeps you at a distance, I feel. And so seeing what the poet is seeing, resonating, feeling the aliveness, kind of just relaxing the mind and being with what the poem is showing us. I mean, there's more to say about it, but I don't want to take up too much time, but I hope that's at least somewhat helpful. And we just have to experiment with that. There's no kind of formula for doing that, but
Sure. That's a quick follow-up then. The context in which the poet is writing is important for us to know then, if you want to be kind of in their shoes, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can be, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good question. Well, we only have like 7 minutes somehow before the Q&A period, but I'd love to do this other Billy Collins poem, Aimless Love, with you. So yeah, Jeff, if you could put that up on the screen. Have any of you read this poem before? Curious. Oh, and I'm sorry, Henry, you had a comment. Did you want to make about the Bishop poem?
I just wanted to say that I joined this a little bit late.
Oh, yeah.
And I joined it as someone who has little knowledge or appreciation of poetry, because Zen Peacemakers sometimes points me in the right direction. And the thought that occurred to me as you were sharing the poem and your comments was that I could spend all day with a camera in that field, in that house, and I would never capture what the poem points out and asks you to feel.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, I agree. There's so much. I also love the image of the fireflies rising.
Yes.
Exactly like the bubbles in champagne.
Yeah.
And champagne is a celebratory drink, and the poem is a kind of
You would point out the one thing I really did yet.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, thank you for that. All right, so Aimless Love. This morning, as I walked along the lakeshore, I fell in love with a wren, and later in the day with a mouse that a cat had dropped under the dining room table. In the shadows of an autumn evening, I fell for a seamstress, still at her machine in the tailor's window, and later for a bowl of broth, steam rising like smoke from a naval battle. This is the best kind of love, I thought, without recompense, without gifts or unkind words, without suspicion or silence on the telephone. The love of the chestnut, the jazz cap, and one hand on the wheel. No lust, no slam of the door, the love of the miniature orange tree, the clean white shirt, the hot evening shower, the highway that cuts across Florida. No waiting, no huffiness or rancor, just a twinge every now and then for the wren who had built her nest on a low branch overhanging the water, and for the dead mouse still dressed in its light brown suit. But my heart is always propped up in a field on its tripod, ready for the next arrow. After I carried the mouse by the tail to a pile of leaves in the woods, I found myself standing at the bathroom sink, gazing down affectionately at the soap, so patient and soluble, so at home in its pale green soap dish. I could feel myself falling again as I felt its turning in my wet hands and caught the scent of lavender and stone. Yeah, so, we don't have a lot of time before the scheduled Q&A, and maybe we can spill over into that a little bit. But yeah, what do you appreciate about this poem? And again, it might just be a single word or a line, an image. It's wonderful to be specific, to go to that moment in the poem that feels really alive. Yeah, tell me how to say your name again. I'm so bad. Oh, you're muted.
Chalem.
Halem.
Ha, with a ha.
Halem. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I enjoy Billy Collins a lot. And this particular poem, he invites me to be a child again. I love watching an adult walking with a little child and how the child will meet everything with wonder. It's like, oh, look at this and look at this. And it's just that this poem has such a wonderful appreciative sense of delight in the wonder.
Yeah.
And similar to the first poem, I guess, that I think it was that there is that twinge, there is that,
Yeah.
the dead mouse, and but even that, I mean, the whole thing of life and death and the wonder of it all is just
Yeah.
delightful.
It is. It's such a delightful poem. I agree. I love it so much. And you're right. It's like, it is a childlike kind of sense of like falling in love with everything, and there's such ordinary things. I fell in love with a wren, and later in the day with a mouse, and that line break is like, oh, a mouse, that's nice. And then you realize it's dead. That had dropped, the cat had dropped under the dining room table. In the shadows of an autumn evening, I felt for a seamstress still at her machine in the tailor's window, and later for a bowl of broth, steam rising like smoke from a naval battle. I mean, that is like a kid would think that, right? The naval battle. But to fall in love with these ordinary things, it's so wonderful because there's no agenda. It's aimless love. He's not looking for anything in return. It's just a pure outpouring of like, I love this, it's beautiful. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, Jacqueline.
I just so related to this falling in love with everything, and the at the end where he's talking about the soap in the dish, and you could tell he's getting ready to fall in love with the soap in the dish. He doesn't say, and I fell in love with the soap in the dish. You see him preparing to, I could feel myself falling again as I felt it's turning in my wet hands.
Yeah.
I just love that, just falling in love with everything in
Yeah.
life, all the small moments, and not the kind of love that asks you where you get uptight and want something back from it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so beautiful. I love that final image too. But yeah, there's no huffiness or rancor, no silence on the telephone. I love that line. We all know what that's like, right? Silence on the telephone. But yeah, the ending, I could feel myself. It's so interesting. Like, after I carried the mouse by the tail to a pile of leaves in the woods, which is what a child would do, right? Bury the mouse in the leaves. I found myself, not I was standing, but I found myself standing at the bathroom sink. Almost like he just magically appeared there, but there's a quality of self-awareness that is quite wonderful there. Gazing down affectionately at the soap, so patient and soluble, so at home in its pale green soap dish, I could feel myself falling again. And he says, I didn't fall again, or I felt myself like I could feel myself falling again as I felt its turning in my wet hands and caught the scent of lavender and stone. God, just the power of that, just the reality of that, just the like, wow. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Jeff.
Yes, I so much appreciation in here and reverence for just the ordinary. But I must say, about a third of the way in, I got hooked by what I think there's another story, and I want to go back to Billy and ask him about this. You mentioned it, John, the telephone, but he said without unkind words or suspicion or silence on the telephone, no lust, no slam of the door. I want to know what that's about.
You mean like for him personally?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's another story there, isn't there? There's kind of a sub narrative of something else in his life that got my attention. I went back to it 3 times and looked at it.
Yeah, or just a kind of generalized way of describing the kind of romantic relationship that we have as a contrast to this more pure love, where, you know, we don't have the slam of the door and the silence on the telephone. And it may be that he's responding to a specific, you know, set of experiences that he's had, you know, personally recently, and he's like, oh my God, thank God that's over. I can enjoy these simple things. But we don't know, and that's more of a sort of interpretive approach to the poem. But it's fine, and yeah, but it provides a wonderful contrast. Those, you know, kind of reactive, intense moments that so often occur or can occur in romantic relationships that he's free of now in this other kind of love. Yeah, Barbara.
Yes, so actually that was also my focus. I recognized very quickly that he is delivering a strong message. He is showing us that there's a 2 different kind of love, that love that is not clingy, not dramatic, and then the other kind of love that most people know, unfortunately, and are so focused on it. So there is a kind of educational quality, using the contrast as you use the word. And also it's so Zen, the appreciative and expression of the beauty of life, and not qualifying it good or bad, but at the same time bringing it to the, you know, yes, it's all wonderful, but also, but my heart is always propped up in a field on its tripod, ready for the next arrow. So she's bringing, or he's bringing down to the reality that reality is not always pink and, you know, and flashy. It is actually, it can be hurting, and that, so it's something that, you know, it's a yes, we can love everything around the world, but does not mean that it's not gonna hurt us.
Exactly. In fact, you're guaranteed, like, if you fall in love with the world in this way, you're making yourself very vulnerable, because these things are subject to impermanence, as everything is. And so your heart will get broken again and again. And there were some comments in the chat. MR, I'm not sure who that is exactly, but it says there's a deep vulnerability too, the vulnerability that comes with childlike wonder. But my heart is always propped up in a field on its tripod, ready for the next arrow. So he's pointing to the same passage that you pointed to. But yeah, vulnerability for sure. It doesn't come without a cost. And I love that image, right? Like my heart's like a tripod with a bullseye on it, you know, waiting for the next arrow. You're out there in the open, you know, your heart is an open target if you move through the world this way. But the joys, I think are well worth it. And now I've done something weird to my Zoom screen. Anyway, there was another hand up.
Well, Barb has her hand up, John.
Oh, okay.
A couple of things, one of which, it was astonishing how the words evoked an inner state. And it was a literal physiological change, just like if, you know, like there was a certain drunkenness, a pleasure in reading it. Right? 'Cause that's that which is in me that knows that kind of love. It just really evoked a whole physiological change. And I also noticed that even like with the dead mouse and with those things which are not lovingly described, but maybe the absence, like the death, even in the grief, you can feel the love. Like it's not other than love.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's such a wholeness.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. How did you say that the poem evokes that which is in me that knows? How did you say that? It was so lovely.
Yeah, it literally evoked almost a drunken state.
Yeah.
Because I know that place, I remember it, and help me, there you go, it helped me remember
Yeah.
that state that I know within me that really responds to the world like that, is
Yeah.
with the world, better yet, is with the world in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we need those reminders, right? Because we get ground down by life, and
Yeah.
it becomes a kind of drudgery, and or it can be, or at least that's too strong, but we lose the sense of wonder or radical amazement, as Heschel says, that we have as children. And it's wonderful when we can get that back, you know, and the poem is sort of exemplary in that way. I think it shows us how we might do that. Or it reminds us of the delight of doing that. And yeah, it's intoxicating. I think you're right. It's exhilarating to have those moments where we fall deeply in love with the world, with just these ordinary things. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. Beautiful. Okay. Matt is sharing a copy. Yeah. Oh, also, yeah. Elizabeth Bishop is my favorite poet. I mean, she's just extraordinary. I would encourage you, if you haven't read her, to read more and check out that film that Jacqueline mentioned. What shall we do, Jeff, with the remaining time? I know we're supposed to have like a half an hour for Q&A. Should we just open it up to questions?
I think, John, I think you could do that. It's Barb, you still have your hand up. Did you get your question out? Or is it just
Yeah. Well, maybe I was going to read some poems from my book. Oh, here's another, Jacqueline. Yeah.
I just wanted to say about what we were just talking about with the Billy Collins poem. The title "Aimless Love" is such a indicator of what makes that love so intoxicating, is that it has no, it just is. It doesn't have any, it's not like, and then we're going to fall in love and we'll go off in the sunset, or, and then I'm going to have the puppy for my own, or whatever, you know, it's totally aimless.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
There's so much in that title.
Yeah, you're right. And then we think about the bullseye, the tripod in the field, and that, you know, the arrows. But yeah, I think it was some Tibetan teacher, I can't remember who, he was asked to define enlightenment, and he said having no agenda.
And I thought with the arrow, I didn't think of it as slings and arrows as a negative thing. I thought of it as Cupid's arrow, waiting,
well, there's that, yeah.
ready for the next arrow. I'm ready for the next thing that life is going to make me fall in love with.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it has that connotation, but also maybe a piercing too, because he's talking about these painful, you know, things as well as the falling in love. But yeah, the title is really interesting in all those ways. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe I'll just read one poem from my book, because I'm so intrigued by your focus on not knowing, and I have a poem that it speaks to that. And then we can just open it up to any questions you might have. So this is from my little book, Dharma Talk, which came out in September. Something and nothing. There's something to be said for having nothing to say, though I don't know what that is or isn't, just as there's something to be known about not knowing, which I would tell you if I could. There must be something to be gained by losing, a seed of victory buried in every failure, else I would not be here. Clearly, there's something to be desired about being beyond desire, as the sages never tire of telling us, and nothing more fulfilling than emptying yourself out. No ground beneath your feet, nothing to hold on to, no handrail, no belief. only this bright, self-sustaining air and a falling that feels like floating. And we don't have to talk about that poem. I just wanted to kind of give you a taste of the book, and I was just so connecting with your focus on not knowing. And there's some other poems that engaged with that theme as well in the book. But yeah, any questions about the things I said in my talk, or more comments about the poems, or we have about 18 minutes left. So what would you, Halem.
Well said. Thank you. I love that word in your poem, floating. I mean, it takes me back to aimless love in a way. But I have this question. I may be taking too big a leap here, but in that poem, where he references the slam of the door and the silence on the phone, I began to, especially when, Jacqueline, when you referred back to the title, it began to me to seem like that moment is the analytical approach to the poem, or a poem.
Interesting.
As opposed to this floating, aimless love.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of
I know what you're trying to say. I think that's true. That the huffiness, the rancor, the needing something, that is more aligned with we could just say with the left brain. The need to know, the need to control, the need to get what we want. And that's more aligned with that particular way of reading poetry. Falling in love with everything, as Collins does in the poem, is aligned with the appreciative way of reading poems, where you just like, oh my God, I love this line. It's incredible. Like, and allowing yourself to feel that and to express that, and then let it take you where it will. But yeah, that's a really good distinction. It's like there's an example of the other kind of way of being embodied in the poem. Yeah, great point. Yeah. Jacqueline.
I just wanted to express an appreciation for the poem you just read of yours. It was really lovely. And I look forward to reading more of your work, and also an appreciation of this, of the poems you chose. Each one of them has that delight in it that my inner child just has been lighting up all week with these poems. They're just so delightful and sentient. All of the senses are like it, and I so appreciate that. So that's it's more of an appreciation than a comment.
That's what we're here for. No, that's beautiful. Thank you. I mean, that makes me so happy when people can, kind of relate to the poems in that way and feel lit up and enlivened by them, and be reminded of how it felt to be a child, to experience that delight and wonder. I mean, you can't ask for anything more than that. And yeah, so the Denise Levertov poem and the William Stafford poem are in my anthology, The Poetry of Impermanence, Mindfulness, and Joy. And there are many other poems like that in that book. And then the other two are in the new anthology. This is the old one. And the other two poems and Speaking Tree are in the new one, The Poetry of Grief, Gratitude, and Reverence. And yeah, I love bringing poems together and grouping them, as I have with these poems, in ways that they're really enriched by their proximity to each other. So anyway, but thank you, Jacqueline. That was really.
I have that book of yours, the grief book, and it's just beautiful. I had the same reaction to it that I did to this.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, the impermanence book. The grief book isn't out yet.
Yeah.
That's
The
yeah.
impermanence book with
Yeah.
the elephant.
Yeah, with the elephant. Everybody loves the elephant. Yeah, Barbara, and then Katie.
Yeah, as I was listening to you and listening to others speak and react to the poetry that you gave as examples, I started to reflect on the fact that, of course, there's so many varieties of poems and not many, these are only the one example of appreciative poems, so they are very much of one quality. And what I realized was that we can actually use such poetry to, I'm a long-term practitioner, so awakening is very important for me. So I have been writing poems a lot, mostly about insights. So I was interested in conveying some message, but actually these kind of poems can be very useful for anyone to self-diagnose in terms of what state of mind am I? Am I in an appreciative state of mind or any other one? If I take this poem and I read it and I cannot get into it in any way, that means that my mind is trapped on something, whatever it is that one is trapped in.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, I think that's really true. And I think they can help us wake up by giving us a taste of how it feels to be in that appreciative mode. And then we just naturally want more of that. I mean, not in a grasping way, but we feel the delight of that deep connection and resonance and appreciation. And it's like, yeah, the world is transformed when you approach it in that way. So yeah, we can take this off the page, off the cushion, and into our lives, and it can make a huge difference, I think. Yeah, that's really true. Yeah, yeah. Katie.
Well, firstly, I just wanted to say thank you so much, not just for today, but for the work that you've been doing. And I've been sharing poetry within my Sangha and attempting to, haven't been quite as bold as you in leaving enough space for real appreciation, but something's starting to grow a little bit. And I just wanted to share, because yesterday, one of my friends who's in her 90s read Aimless Love to our group. And somebody asked her, how could you read it so beautifully? And she said, well, it helps to become familiar with the poem and then step back and let it read itself.
Oh, beautiful.
So, yeah, I just thought I would share that. And
that's great.
yeah, may our appreciation just grow. It's with poetry, it's easier, and then we can take it and apply it to friends and family, or the difficulties of our world.
Yeah. It's easy to appreciate the butterflies and the fireflies.
Yeah.
But that's great. So she said, it's good to be familiar with the poem. And that's one of the things I would encourage you to do is when you find a poem you really love, just reread it again and again and again. You'll deepen your relationship with it. You won't know more about it necessarily, but you'll be more intimate with it. And then she said, you get out of the way and the poem reads itself. That's wonderful. It's like you become a conduit for the poem. That's beautiful. And you began by saying you're sharing poems with your Sangha and maybe not leaving enough space. Yeah, I would just encourage you. I mean, there's nothing easier than just reading a poem. And if you want to have a discussion, just asking people, what do you like about the poem? Like, you don't need any literary training or special knowledge or anything like that to say what you like. Everybody can say what they like. And then it can be just really fun, I mean, poetry should be fun. not this kind of work that we, what does it mean? So anyway, you might experiment with just like asking people to say what they like and see where that goes. You know?
Well, I think I will, because today's been fun. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, Jeff.
I was taught as a young person never to go to a party without a gift. So in the spirit of fun, this is very short, so if you'll indulge, I wrote this about 4 years ago. It's called Avian Mishigas. Before dawn, sitting in the dark, all the Zendo windows are open and the air moves gently. A perfect temperature for me in a Golden State Warriors t-shirt. Breezes dry and savory with the smells of crisping wildflowers and high mountain grasses. As if on cue, 100 crows, jays, woodpeckers, and dozens of other Rocky Mountain birds I cannot name erupt in utter avian mishigas, scratching at the trees, bickering, pecking at the walls and the roof, singing sweetly and cawing as if they were being pursued by the foxes. Atop of trees' song system, relaying news of the day. Everything's getting worse. Pathetic. Wake up, wake up. I'm sure I hear at least one lucid koan presentation. Scream. The bell rings anyway. Then, as quickly as they began, it's quiet. Their job of raising the sun is complete.
Wonderful. Thank you. Wow, so much energy in that poem. I mean, you really capture this sudden explosion out of nowhere and this quiet Zendo. And yeah, really nice. Oh, I like that. Thank you for sharing it. Yeah, beautiful.
Someone, I believe it was Barb, asked if you could share the names of the books that you've been referring to, John. Barb, was that you? Yeah.
Well, you mean my books or?
Yeah, I believe so, Barb. Yeah.
So Dharma Talk is my most recent book of poems, and it's quite small. I wanted to write a book about which no one could say, well, yeah, it's all right, but it goes on a little too long. Yeah, it's around. Yeah, there's some haiku in it, and they're Dharma poems. It has a foreword by Joseph Goldstein. Yeah, so there's that. And this book, The Poetry of Impermanence, Mindfulness, and Joy, is an anthology of other people's work. So there's Billy Collins in here, William Stafford, Denise Levertov, but also the great ancient Chinese and Japanese poets. So there's Li Po and Du Fu and Basho and Busan and Issa and various others, Anshan. And then European poets, it's quite varied, but people tell me it's good. And then I have a book of essays, which I haven't been referring to, but since this is a little promotional moment in our time together, it's called The Dharma of Poetry. And this is kind of a companion to the anthology. So it's some essays about the poems in the anthology called The Dharma of Poetry. How poems can deepen your spiritual practice and open you to joy. So those are my three most recent books, more Dharma oriented books. So yeah, and then the new book, The Poetry of Grief, Gratitude, and Reverence, is coming out in September of this year. And I'll be doing some readings from that online and with the publisher and so on. So you can probably, reconnect at that time. I hope it'd be great to see some of you again. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome.
And how is there some way that you will be advertising when you'll be giving these other talks?
Yeah, I have a website which I don't update often enough, but it's just johnbrehmpoet.com. And yeah, if you check back from time to time, if I have a public event, I'll list it there. And yeah, you can kind of keep track that way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for your interest.
Mm.
Yeah. Any other questions or kind of final comments?
LM, you have your hand up again?
Yeah.
Yes, forgive me. This is so much fun. John, you have affirmed for me something that I have been somewhat struggling with for 50 years.
Wow. Wow.
And a small example of that is a year after I finished undergraduate studies in poetry, I went to Trinity College in Dublin to study a year of Anglo-Irish poetry.
Wow.
And I had a tutorial, a small group, 10 people, and the professor said, go out, find a poet with poems you haven't read before, and bring one in and present it to the class.
Mhm.
And I sometimes make decisions that I guess are a little extreme. And I came into class and I said, this is a James Joyce poem I've never seen before. Let's read it out loud all together 100 times. I don't want to talk about it or analyze it. And he was kind and he said, well, I think I understand, but that's not what we do here.
Yeah.
So I left Trinity College.
Wow. So what did he want to do instead of that? To analyze it? Or
Analyze.
Yeah.
Break it apart, talk about it, analyze it. And there, throughout this whole presentation or with you was a sense, it's like, I love music and the music in language, the music in poetry that has a whole tone, has a whole drift to it that is somewhat other than analyzing and knowing about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I really believe in read it 100 times and just listen to different people reading it and the different voices. It's just so I thank you very much.
No, that's beautiful. I mean, yeah, just to be immersed in the sensual quality, the sonic dimension of the poem, the sounds and rhythms. I mean, that's poetry. I mean, prose has that to some extent, but not nearly as much or as, there's a subtlety and nuance in the music of poetry, the music of the language, just the delight all by itself. Even if you don't know what the poem is saying, to just hear that music and delight in it is really important. That's wonderful that you had that impulse to do that. It's a pretty ballsy thing to do, to come in and
Well, it was influenced as an undergraduate. I was invited by Hayden Carruth to sit in on a graduate class reading poems.
Yeah.
So he would have us go around the table, about 10 people, each person reading the poem.
Yeah.
But the real shocker for me was when Hayden read the poem.
Yeah.
As a jazz musician and steeped as he was in all the kind of traditional I can't think of the word right now. Yeah. It was like it was a whole different poem.
Yeah.
The sounds, the rhythms, it was just wonderful to experience that.
That's great. Was it at Syracuse? Yeah. Yeah, I was at Cornell and I had some friends at Syracuse who studied with Hayden and would rave about his teaching and stuff. So that's great. That's wonderful. Well, I'm so glad. I'm so glad this has been such a deep experience for you. That means a lot to me. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.